A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company, for this Thursday, October the 6th. My name is Cam Edwards, but hopefully you know that by now. Glad to have you with us on today's program. We're going to be looking at one particular race. I mean, we're just a few weeks away from Election Day now, and things are heating up around the country. There's a lot of actually really interesting polling going on. We wrote about a poll from Trafalgar on Wednesday at Cam and Company showing the Washington State Senate race neck and neck. Patty Murray and Tiffany Smiley, I think just 2 points separating the two of them. Another poll released by Trafalgar today showing the New York governor's race and the New York Attorney General's race. Also, in essence, deadlocked within the poll's margin of error. Kathy Hochul up just 2 points over Republican candidate Lee Zeldin. And then Letitia James actually trailing her Republican opponent in her bid to win another term as New York's Attorney General. Again, I think this is going to be look, every election is the most important election that we faced, right? And every year we hear, well, turnout's key. But it's true. I mean, look, I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Last year, in what was supposed to be a blue state, right? Virginia had sort of lost its purple status. It had been almost a decade since we'd elected a Republican governor. Democrats had taken over both chambers of the state legislature, and that was supposed to solidify Virginia's status as a blue state. Last year, Republicans won all of the statewide offices that were up for election, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general. They took back the House of Delegates from the Democrats, and I think next year, frankly, are in pretty good shape to take back the state Senate as well. So we've seen these sort of surprises before, and frankly, in Virginia, the Democrats' insistence that gun control was going to be a winning issue and something that it was their first legislative priority once they took control of all levers of state government in 2020, that came back and bit them on the rear end in 2021. I think the same thing is definitely a possibility in New York State, particularly if those upstate New York gun owners turn out in force on Election Day and cast their vote in favor of pro-freedom candidates. But we're going to be looking at a local race today down in Florida. It's a state Senate seat, currently held by a Democrat who is under a lot of criticism, as are Democrats statewide, for a campaign mailer showing her opponent on a shooting target. Yeah, I know. I mean, all this violent imagery, right? And you don't have to think too hard about what the reaction would be if the shoe was on the other foot. If this were a Republican candidate who had put his opponent on a shooting target, the outcry that would have ensued, right? How dare you suggest that this candidate should be the victim of political violence? Honestly, the media in Florida has not really picked up on this story, with the exception of Florida Politics. They've done a fantastic job of actually reporting on this controversy. And the latest update is that a pair of black Central Republicans in Florida, or Central Florida Republicans rather, have come out and denounced this mailer targeting Corey Simon, a former football star, played for Florida State, as well as in the NFL. The mailer sent out by Senator sent out by Democratic campaign officials endorsing Senator Loran Ausley. And Ausley was supposed to have approved this under Florida state law. We'll get to that in just a second. As Florida Politics reports, some say the mailer, which focuses on gun control and depicts Simon on a shooting target, calls back to a racist history of black men as physical targets or characterizations of black men as violent. Simon's campaign, local Republicans, the Senate president designate, and a Tallahassee area pastor have already denounced the ad, which was put together by a campaign arm of Senate Democrats run by Senate Minority Leader Lauren Brooke. On Thursday, Deltona Republican Representative Webster Barnaby and Seminole Republican House candidate Bernie Jacques, both of whom are black men, became the latest to come to Simon's defense, with Barnaby saying, quote, "The divisive, ignorant use of a black man for target practice has no place in civil political discourse." Going on to say, quote, "We hope that members of the Florida Black Caucus will join us in condemning this mailer and those who approved its creation and distribution. We may not say eye to eye on everything, but surely we can agree that the political disagreement should never include dangerous imagery of a black man being used for target practice." So this is the flyer, at least one side of the flyer. On the other side, there are these cutouts of children backed by targets with bullet holes. The ad reads, "Don't let extremists like Corey Simon turn our schools into shooting ranges." And then, as you can see on the flip side, there's Simon displayed on a target stand. You can't see, but they're actually shell casings scattered beneath the target. Florida Politics says the ad was paid for by the Florida Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee that includes a disclaimer mentioning support for Lorraine Osley, her fellow Senator Janet Cruz, and Senate candidate Janelle Perez. Now, what's interesting about this, beyond the gross imagery that's being used here, is that there is some dispute as to whether or not Lorraine Osley actually did approve this, the campaign, as she was required to do under Florida election law. So the campaign committee that put this ad together says, oh, yeah, all of the candidates gave their approval. Well, this week, Osley and Simon were actually at a debate. She was asked about this. And she said, quote, "I have no control over what they send out. I do not prefer these campaign tactics. I don't think either of us do, but neither of us can control them," which is a lie. She absolutely can control what is sent out in her name with her approval, because, again, under Florida law, she's supposed to approve it. And the campaign committee says she did approve it. They say, in fact, that it has written approval from Lorraine Osley, as well as the two other Democrats named in the ad. Now, Florida Politics asked to see those approvals. So far, the campaign committee in question has not provided them to Florida Politics. Either way, I think it's fair to say that this is an ad that is creating quite a bit of controversy here. And I mean, look, I don't see any other way around it. One of these two groups of Democrats isn't telling the truth. Either Lorraine Osley and her campaign aren't telling the truth about whether or not they approved the ad, or the campaign committee isn't telling the truth that Osley approved the ad before they sent it out. Either way, one of those two groups of Democrats isn't being honest, seems to me, with Florida voters. Now, what about the ad itself? You know, again, this goes back to I mean, frankly, the fundamentals of the gun control debate. Make it about emotion, right? And why wouldn't they? We do care about our kids. We care about our safety. We care about the people we love. For many of us, that's why we own guns in the first place. For anti-gun Democrats, of course, the only way you can show that you care about kids is to restrict the right of adults to keep and bear arms. If you can prohibit people from exercising their Second Amendment rights, so goes the argument anyway. There'll be some sort of trickle-down effect on violent criminals. Now, that's not how things work in the real world, unfortunately. You know, in the 15 years or so that Washington, D.C., actually more than 15 years, 76 to 2008, almost 30 years that Washington, D.C. had its handgun ban in place, it had some of the highest homicide rates in the country. Baltimore, Maryland, where concealed carry has, in essence, been banned for decades, has had 300 plus homicides for going on 8 years now. This will be the 8th straight year for more than 300 plus homicides in a city that has maybe a handful of concealed carry holders. Now, that might change thanks to the fact that the May issue laws in Maryland have been struck down. But again, for decades, nope. Legal gun ownership, very difficult to achieve. Carrying a firearm legally, impossible to achieve. Violent criminals continuing to prey on innocent victims. Yeah, that's a commonality, unfortunately, for these regimes with very restrictive gun laws in place. Additionally, in Florida, you know, the state legislature actually did impose some gun control after the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, but they also imposed the Aaron Feist School Guardian Program, which ensures that there is an armed response on every campus of every public school in the state of Florida, whether it is a volunteer, maybe a retired law enforcement officer, retired member of the military, or current school staffers. But there is someone there on campus who can respond in case of an active shooting attack. Frankly, I think that is a much more pragmatic approach, and certainly one that's more constitutionally sound. If the goal is to save lives, if the goal is to protect kids while they are on these public school campuses, I think that's the way to go. Lorraine Osley, of course, doesn't believe that. Her fellow Democrats don't believe that. They believe that instead we should be banning guns, including some of the most commonly sold firearms in the country. We should, again, be cracking down on those trying to exercise their right to keep and bear arms in the hopes that maybe there will be some impact felt on those cowardly killers who would target children. Again, from a policy perspective, I think it's a bad idea. From a political perspective this year in Florida, though, I also think that this campaign ad certainly has a potential to backfire on Florida Democrats. And as Florida Politics points out, Osley is perhaps the most endangered Senate Democrat. I think her district, it's still a D plus, but I think it's like a D plus 3 now. So in a election environment that favors Republicans, Osley could be given the boot. And if that happens, if she's replaced by a Republican, by Corey Simon, and the Democrats do not pick up any additional seats, Republicans would have a 3/5 majority, a supermajority in the state legislature. And that, I believe, would be very good news for gun owners in the state of Florida. You know, Governor Ron DeSantis has talked about constitutional carry. We did not see a constitutional carry bill get a vote in the Florida legislature, or even a hearing, frankly, last year. But again, the more pro-Second Amendment candidates that are in place, the better the chances are that will happen in 2023. So we will keep our eyes on this race. As far as I know, by the way, Osley and the Democrat committee that put this out together, neither group has actually apologized. Osley says, well, it's not how I'd like to do things, but I don't think she actually offered Corey Simon an apology. She has certainly not demanded that not that I've seen anyway, that the committee pull this mailer. So, you know, they're Osley's saying, well, it's not how I would do things, but this is how things have been done. And so far, doesn't seem like Florida Democrats are backing down from the racist imagery and the violent imagery depicting Corey Simon. There is the target of shooters. All right, let's turn our attention now to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. We're going to start there with a case out of a case out of Colorado, where a murder case is raising all kinds of questions about the state's probation and parole system, according to the Colorado Springs Gazette. I wish I could say again that this was an outlier, but I'm not sure that it is. Adika Simmons, she's going to be in court this afternoon on murder charges. She apparently was arrested multiple times over the past few months on charges including first-degree murder. And yet, according to the Colorado Springs Gazette, her probation officer, quote, asked to have her probation re-granted on 2 different occasions when Dika Simmons was arrested in connection with 2 different crimes, posting bond just days before her arrest on suspicion of first-degree murder. The Gazette says that further investigation shows that the day after 38-year-old Dika Simmons accepted a plea deal in Lincoln County and was released from jail, this individual, Daximo Seja, was killed in Colorado Springs. Dika Simmons, again, a suspect, and has been charged with the death of Seja, but she was a suspect apparently for several months before she was arrested. And the Colorado Springs Gazette says her extensive criminal background raises questions among some experts on how she was able to continue to be granted probation, revocation, and plea deals despite those working with her insisting that she had not been rehabilitated and remained a danger to the community. Well, I'll tell you why. Because the criminal justice system is fundamentally flawed right now. It's not working not only the way that it should, it's not working the way we expect it to. 97% of felony cases result in plea bargains, which means reduced crime. Also means that prosecutors in many cases will overcharge because they know that this case is going to end up in a plea deal. So throw the everything but the kitchen sink at them, and then offer them, a more modest deal, which in some cases really is awfully modest. Again, I have no trouble every day finding stories that make me say, are you kidding me? Are you serious with this sentence? So this is not an outlier. This is not the exception. Cases like this, unfortunately, are the rule. And while I'm glad to see the Colorado Springs Gazette covering this story, I hope that they don't treat this as a one-off. And they really need to look to see how many more Dika Simmonses there are in the Colorado criminal justice system, because I guarantee she's not the only one. Now, today's armed citizen story, also from Colorado, where police say a gun and a machete were used in a burglary in the town of Northglenn before the teenage burglary suspects were shot by a homeowner. We still don't have a lot of details about what happened this past weekend. It was Sunday afternoon. We do know that apparently the two teenagers in question, police believe, are also responsible for burglarizing a nearby home in Northglenn, Colorado, before they then moved on to this second house. LJ Percival and her son came home Sunday afternoon, and she says it was clear that someone had already broken in. So she called 911 and said, and was told it's going to be a while before officers can get there because there's a, quote, more serious situation nearby. That's when she learned soon afterwards that that other serious situation was connected to her own burglary, and that the burglary suspects had been shot and killed. Northglenn police say that the two teenage suspects broke a fence after apparently breaking into Percival's home and burglarizing it. They then broke a fence to gain entry into the backyard of another home. Well, the homeowner was there at the time, saw what was going on, and police describe a, quote, exchange of gunfire between the homeowner and at least one of the suspects. Again, the police say that they had both a machete and a gun on them. CBS News reports, by the way, quote, the Colorado Make My Day law gives homeowners immunity from prosecution if they kill an intruder in their home under certain conditions. Well, yes, including being shot at. That you do have your right to defend yourself if you're being shot at. And if somebody breaks into the backyard of your home, if they break down a fence to try to get entry to the backyard, odds are they're not there to sell Girl Scout cookies to you. Odds are they're there for your stuff, perhaps your life. And yes, you are justified in defending yourself. I don't know why CBS felt the need to include the Make My Day law reference, because this looks to be a pretty clear-cut case of self-defense, but we'll keep our eyes on this story. If any more information develops and becomes available, we'll let you know about it. Finally today, our good deed of the day, in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. At the Tulsa State Fair, an off-duty firefighter from Claremore, Oklahoma, a good Samaritan, able to revive a individual who was suffering some life-threatening health problems. This was over the weekend. Actually, I take that back. It was, I guess, about a week ago. It was last Thursday night. Lieutenant Jonathan Cates was there at the Tulsa State Fair with his wife, Ann, and they saw a couple, or a crowd, rather, forming. So Cates went to investigate, and he said it was like a switch flipped in his head when he saw a man on the ground. He said, you fall back to your highest level of training. He said, and for, a firefighter, that's just what we do. That's our bread and butter. That's what the citizens want us to be able to do and do well. So we just jumped into action. We started asking questions that I normally start asking. He said, we didn't have some of the tools that I would normally have, so I was a little bit off the game, but I just got in there, started doing CPR, waiting to see, who showed up first. Sergeant Scott Streeter with the Tulsa County Sheriff's Office was actually the first officer to respond to the scene. And his body camera shows Kate starting CPR compression. And Streeter says, do you want to take over? And Jonathan Cates said, yeah. Streeter said, so I started on chest compression. Shortly after that, his legs started to rise into whatever had happened. He started to get some reconsciousness to him. He said, I stopped the compressions, checked for a pulse. About that time, another deputy arrived. We both checked for a pulse, started getting a pulse, and put him into what we call a recovery position. So even though the sergeant there took over CPR from the off-duty firefighter, he says that if Jonathan Cates were not around, this individual probably would not have made it. He said people all the time see things. They don't want to be a part of them. They just kind of look and keep going. He said, luckily, he stopped. And if it wasn't for him, the guy might not have made it, because a few minutes before I got there, him doing CPR for that time, that's probably what kept him alive. Jonathan Cates' wife, Ann, says it was wild to see him just jump in without hesitation, saying he's always gone to the station, and I'm just amazed to see his work in action. Man is expected to recover, and I hope that Lieutenant Jonathan Cates got a turkey leg or something, just as a little reward for being in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. But certainly we thank him for his very, very good deed. Now, that is all the time we've got for you on this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I do want to thank you for being a part of the program, as always. We will be back with another edition of Cam & Company on Monday. But in the meantime, we're going to get you caught up on all of the latest Second Amendment news and information at BearingArms.com. And there's a lot to talk about these days. We really are in a supercharged moment for the Second Amendment, so make sure you're visiting regularly. If you like what you see, I would also ask you to become a VIP member at Bearing Arms. In addition to showing your support for the independent pro-Second Amendment journalism we do there at the website and here on the program, we're going to give you exclusive content, news stories, and analysis you won't get anywhere else, because your support really does matter, and it truly does make a difference. So thank you again. I hope you have a great weekend. Looking forward to talking to you again on Monday. Until then, be well, be safe, be free.